Well, Chris, thank you so much for being on the show today. Excited to dive into your journey, sports broadcasting, journalism, all that sort of thing. Kind of to start this out, can you kind of share maybe a little bit about your journey into what you're doing today? Was this always a dream for you, and kind of how you ended up where you are?
Television was a dream, but being on the news wasn't. I actually, my freshman year at UNCG, I actually dropped classes that had to do with news and shooting and lighting aesthetics and all this other stuff that I now use today because back then I said I was never going to need to know any of this stuff. And my mom was like, "Oh, you should probably think about that in a second." I was like, "Nah, I'm not going to ever use this stuff."
Yeah.
Because when I was in school, I guess I was like the last group of people that was still kind of taught if you're in front of the camera, you're in front of the camera. If you're behind the camera, you're behind the camera. And pretty much right after I graduated, all that changed. So, but my original dream was to be more so an entertainment TV host. In college, I started working at the Greensboro News and Record. I did some stuff with them before in high school, which is how I got that opportunity, actually right before college started. So like literally a week or two after I graduated high school, I got a job there. And then I went to UNCG, and then I started working at 102 Jams in Greensboro and, doing some hosting things and stuff on campus and all that. And then in my junior year, I was able to host a couple of shows on MTVU. It was this closed circuit channel that was just on college campuses, which gave me an opportunity to do things on MTV. So I did the MTVU Woody Awards in 2007. In my junior year, I was a backstage correspondent, so I got a chance to interview the celebrities and stuff like that after they won awards and things. And so that's where I thought my trajectory was taking me, is to do that, to be that type of person. Like, what's his name? Like Carson Beck. No, that's a football player.
Yeah,
I'm talking Carson Daly.
Carson Daly? Okay, yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sports has taken over my brain.
That's right.
So that's where I thought I was going. And, I was even down in the running. I was like the final two people to host this new show that MTV was, coming up with and producing. And then all of a sudden I didn't hear anything back from people anymore. And then I started emailing my contacts, and then the emails kept bouncing back. And I was like, wait, what's going on? And then in the newspaper, maybe like a month later, I see that MTV and Viacom had just laid off a bunch of people, which included the people who were about to try to hire me for a particular show. And that's when MTV made the switch from shows that had hosts to reality shows. And after that, that's when you got Jersey Shore and things like that.
Oh, wow.
So I really had a hard time pivoting. So I went through some time after college. I was a nightclub manager. I worked at Victoria's Secret. I was a pro wrestler. I was a rapper. I did everything that I could. I was like trying to throw everything at the wall and trying to, keep the lights on, but then also figure out what I want to do. And then WXII in Winston-Salem put out that they needed a traffic anchor, and they weren't necessarily looking for somebody with a traditional news background. So I was like, well, at least this can get me into television, and I can maybe do this for a year or two, get some tape, and then be on my way. And let's see, I was hired in 2013, so 12 years later, here I am still in news doing that. So that's kind of how I got started. And as I got into news, I realized quickly I didn't want to do the hard news. So I gravitated towards the sports. And my first news director kind of placed the seed in my head. If you keep doing this, you can get good at it and possibly go to a network. So that's basically how that's the short version of how I got to where I'm at right now.
So a couple questions. Yeah, you're like spanning the spectrum here. You said you're doing some rapping. You're also working at Victoria's Secret. Like, what's the story behind that?
So the nightclub I was working at, we rode a nice high for like a good 2.5, 3 years. And then there was like a dip in the market, just the local, club market. And so things kind of went down. So because of that, if the club isn't making as much money, the way I was paid, the manager wasn't making much money. So one of my bartenders who was making money on the weekends bartending for me during the week was a manager at a Victoria's Secret. And so she was just like, hey, I'm looking for people, and men don't usually want to work with us, and we usually need somebody to help us stock in the stock room. And sometimes women want to hear from men on the floor. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a try. And I did it I think I was working there for like 7 months. So
Wow. That's
so
unique.
I know how to arrange a bra drawer just like Victoria's Secret does in
Okay.
there. So I helped my wife out with that. She loves it.
That is a unique skill for sure. I guess since we're in that time frame, I want to jump to this, and then we can kind of get to modern day. You also were a wrestler for a
Yeah.
time, and little side note behind me, I've been using ChatGPT a lot more the last couple months. I've been reading about it, and so when I do these interviews, I'll like put in people's names to see what comes up, and I saw an image. I saw you
Oh,
in
wow.
your like wrestling gear
Oh,
on
wow.
some website. So, in your Instagram, you say former pro wrestler. So, talk to me about this.
Yeah. I was never passionate about being a nightclub manager. It was a way to still do radio part-time. And it kind of worked well with radio, you know what I'm saying? And it gave me some freedom during the week to, try to figure things out. I had, some failed entrepreneurial ventures and stuff like that. So I just kind of got to a point to where, I was just like, I need to try everything that I've ever wanted to do. And pro wrestling is something I was very much so passionate about as a kid. Anybody who knew me as a kid knew that like Chris is going to talk your ear off about, pro wrestling and Bret Hart and Sting and all those guys. So I was just like, why not? And I've been working out anyway, gotten in shape. And so it's like, let me go to a local wrestling school. And, I went to CWF Mid-Atlantic and told them like, hey, I'm a local radio guy. I work at 102 Jams, but this isn't a gimmick. I'm not trying to do any exposures or anything like that. I really am into this. And like, whatever I got to do to prove that, just let me know. And I can, I want to come in and train. And so that started in 2012. I went to like early 2016, being an actual pro wrestler. And, it was cool. And now I do commentary for Ashe Pro Wrestling out of Charlotte. So I'm still connected.
What ended the career? Like injury, just body hurts?
No, it was just TV got in the way because I started TV 20. So it was a point where I was doing all three. I was doing radio, television, and wrestling. So Monday through Friday, I was on television. And on the weekends, my whole weekend was wrestling and radio. So I'd leave a wrestling show, drive back to Greensboro, sleep for 2 hours, and go do a radio show. And then go take a nap, get back up, and go drive somewhere else for another wrestling match. So I had a crazy, but it was a really fun time of my life. I really liked that time. But that's when I was doing traffic. And once I got the opportunity to go into the sports realm on television, that was a weekend job. And the new general manager that we had at our station at the time didn't like the fact that I was a pro wrestler. And so she was kind of like, with this job, clearly you're not going to be available on weekends, but I'm also hoping that this is enough money for you to not want to do that. So I was like, okay, fair point.
Yeah.
And since I had a more prominent role with the station, I just made her a promise I wouldn't do it. So that was really it. I always thought that every time, for some reason in that period of my life, everything was it wasn't permanent in my head. So I looked at, this is what I'm doing for like the next 2 years. And then I'm going to get back to wrestling. So I've always said to my wrestling friends, don't worry, I'm coming back. Don't worry, I'm coming back. I've been saying that since 2016. And I haven't stepped in a ring since. I've done, training and stuff, but I haven't actually wrestled. So, I still in my head think that one day I'm going to have another match. So we'll see.
That's great. So you, to monitor now, you're with WRAL, which is a local news affiliate here in the Raleigh-Durham market. How did you go from Greensboro to kind of where you're doing today?
Yeah, so I was the weekend sports anchor at WXI in Winston-Salem from the end of 2015 until 2020. And, in this industry, you sign contracts. So, at that time, I think my first contract was like 2 years, and then I signed another contract. It was like 2.5 years, something like that. And so I always was looking to, move up to something bigger because, I love Greensboro. I'm from the area. You can never get me to say anything bad about Greensboro, but it's market 46. And, right now Raleigh is market number 22, and for an ESPN, a CBS Sports, Fox Sports, for those places to take you seriously, they're going to want to see you succeed in a top 25 market, right?
Wow.
So
So this is like nationally when you say 2246.
yeah. What their national Nielsen rankings are, and there's for people who are not familiar with it, there's about 215 or so markets in the United States. So Greensboro isn't small by any means. It's 46 out of like 215 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But when you're talking about big markets, you're talking about L.A., Chicago, New York, Dallas, Miami, those types of places. Raleigh is starting to look like those spots. Not as big as the ones I named, but it's inching up. Just 10 years ago, I want to say Raleigh was market like 33. It's moved up to 22. That's how fast it's moving. And it's right behind Charlotte. And Charlotte was like way ahead of Charlotte's 21. Charlotte used to be like 10 spots ahead of Raleigh. But that's one of the things. So I saw a job opening that popped open in 2019, and I had a friend who just left WXI to go to WRAL, and I just kind of asked her, like, hey, what's the best, person to kind of contact and, talk to about this? And so she gave me the news director at the time's email. Right after I applied, I just sent him an email just explaining what I've done at WXI and why I feel like I'd be, a good fit for WRAL. And I got an email back literally within 15 minutes to schedule a phone interview. And when I scheduled that phone interview, the resume that they had, I put pro wrestling on it. That was some advice I got from somebody who worked at CNN. I go to NABJ, National Association of Black Journalists convention every year. And I went to, in 2018, I had lunch with somebody from CNN, and it just kind of came up. I used to be a pro wrestler, and she was like, why isn't this on your resume? And I was like, I don't feel like it has anything to do with television. She's like, no, you need to put this on your resume. And she gave me all her reasons why. So I did it. WRAL saw that. When Rick Gall called me, it was supposed to be just a 15-minute chat. We talked for 15 minutes about pro wrestling and WRAL's history with pro wrestling. And then we talked for another 30 minutes about the job. And at the end, we tied it back to wrestling. And after that, I still had to go through the interview process and have other rounds of interviews. But after that phone interview, I knew I had it. So because it was just like, you don't schedule a 15-minute phone interview and stay on the phone with somebody for 45 minutes, and you have to force yourself to get off the phone at that point. Yeah. And he sounded excited to talk to me. So, so wrestling came in handy. When I was just throwing something at the wall, ended up being one of my saving graces.
Yeah. So I'm curious. So you're with WRAL. You've been in the Raleigh area 6-ish years, but you do like a number of things. So you do some stuff at WRAL. You cover the Carolina Panthers a little bit. You do some sports commentating at the CBS. You do the ASC wrestling. Like, I don't know. I guess week to week is pretty different to you based on the seasons. Yeah. And I don't know how you juggle. Like, how does it work maybe in your industry to juggle different network partnerships? Like, what do they allow? What they don't allow? What's that like for you?
So that was another reason why I wanted to leave the station I was at. And I'll say nothing bad about WXI. But one thing that in the industry that you may see, or I don't know if people will ever notice it, the smaller the market, the least likely they are to allow their talent to do outside gigs. I forgot her name, but there's this young lady who used to be the sideline reporter for Ninja Warrior, American Ninja Warrior. She was also a sports reporter for like KABC in LA or something. So a lot of these bigger markets will have and allow their talent to do outside gigs because the way that they look at it, if I have somebody on my roster who's also doing this on national television, it makes us look better.
Right.
And so WRAL in the negotiation said they'd be okay if I did certain things on the outside. I just have to get permission. And the contract I had before was a lot more restrictive. Mm-hmm. And just kind of who I am, I don't think, even if I had like a regular cubicle desk job 9 to 5 type of thing, I'd still be doing some other stuff on the side. It's just kind of how I'm wired. Because I'm passionate about so many different things. I don't think one thing informs who I am. Yeah. It all kind of makes sense as far as who I am. So But yeah, I mean, you're right. It is a juggle, and it's season to season. It just kind of depends on what's going on. Like next week, I have as we're recording this, next week I have some sideline reporting gigs coming up. I have some play-by-play for softball coming up since that season is starting. Baseball, I have that coming up in a couple of months. So, there's always different things, and WRL themselves offer the ability for me to do a podcast. The Panthers podcast I do with them is for WRL. And I've done documentaries with them. I've done a documentary independently from WRL. So, there's a lot of cool stuff that it allows me to do.
You're having a conversation with somebody, the inevitably like, what do you do? What do you say when someone asks, like, what do you do?
It's just been in the last 8 months that I can just say I'm a storyteller and I can tell stories through live television broadcasts. I can tell stories through journalism. I can tell stories, through pro wrestling. I can, tell stories through podcasting. I can tell stories through film, but I'm a storyteller. So I had that confusion for myself for a long time. What do I do? Who am I? And so I just kind of, last 8 months, I've been, understanding that a little bit more.
So of all these things, you do kind of play-by-play commentary, you've done some broadcasting journalism, most things. Like, what's your favorite thing to do of all the different projects you get to be involved in?
That's the tough part because they all speak to me in different ways. I think the sum total of it all is who I am. They all represent a piece of me. I think I'm most loyal to what pays me the most. So, shout outs to WRL right now. But like if other things start paying me more, decisions will have to be made. But I think that's just who I am. It reminds me of my time back when I was, doing TV, radio, and wrestling. Like, I didn't have one bad day of the week. People would wake up and dread Monday. Like, I'd wake up and be like, man, I get a chance to be on TV. I was just in the ring, And then it's Friday. It's like, I'm about to be in a ring. And then the next day, I'm going to be on radio. Then I'm going to be in a ring. Then I'm going to be on a radio. Then I'm going to be in a ring. And then I'm going to be on TV. So it was like, how can you have a bad week? So I just, for me, I think that's the perfect way for me to design my life.
Yeah. I imagine, part of this is you enjoy it, but also you are thinking about the future, future steps, so I think part of, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, like maybe taking some of the gigs, like doing play-by-play for certain sports. How much of it, I mean, can you say is like, I really love this sport or this gig versus like, hey, I'm doing this to kind of set possibilities for the future?
There's definitely some of that for sure. It's some of especially on the play-by-play side, because I see a world where that's a potential future. The reason why is because a lot of the play-by-play people that you see on network television, a lot of them are, date-to-date type of people. So they may not have a full-time contract. For instance, they know that they're going to get 50 dates a year from ESPN, and they can fill out the rest of their year the way that they want. And they're getting paid well enough with those 50 dates to where that's all that they can just do that if they want to. But then they have other things that they can do. And I like the idea of that. And so that's one of the things I want to work towards, especially, now that film is in the mix in my life. But so to work towards that, I know I need to get the reps. So yeah, there are things that, it's not about how much money it pays. I've done some play-by-play for free, for $25, for $75, for $100. I don't necessarily need that, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But it's more so for, the reps for the tape and, to make sure that I'm staying fresh with everything and still learning. I mean, you always have to learn. You always have to get better. So, if I can take those opportunities to do so, I'm not going to, turn my nose up at it.
Yeah. It's funny. It reminds me, for those maybe that have been listening to the show, the 4th episode back in the fall when I started this was with Tim Donnelly, who's with 99 The Fan in Raleigh.
Oh, yeah.
And talking to him about his journey.
99 Fan Cup.
There you go. For those watching. It's been well used. Yeah, he was sharing how, like, back in like Nebraska, when he was coming up, he's like doing high school girls volleyball and like, just trying to like get in there and learn and do things. One of the things I'm curious for some of that, especially the play-by-play stuff, like how much What does prep look like? And I'm sure it depends on the level and like how big the game is.
Yeah.
But how do you prepare for what these sporting events that you're going to cover, especially if it's like a team or a sport that you don't spend a lot of time on?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I never even thought about play-by-play until a few years ago. I talked before about how I go to NABJ conventions, and the main person that hires talent at NBC said, "You are very talented." NBC Sports says you are very talented, and you do a lot, but you could stand to do a little bit more. And so I took that as a challenge. She was like, if you look at Mike Tirico, he hosts, he anchors for us, he does play-by-play, he reports, he does everything.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I was just like, say no more. So I went out. I just happened to have this next to me. I bought this book.
Art of
And
Sportscasting. Nice.
I learned from Tom Hedrick how to, prepare for these things. So it is different. It's a little bit different of a process than what I do in TV. You still have to be prepared no matter what, but there's a certain intimacy you have to have with knowledge as you're doing play-by-play, because in a lot of cases there's so much time to fill. So if I'm doing a women's basketball game, for instance, which I've done a women's basketball game recently for Wake Forest, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to look through what both teams have done this season. What are their records? Who's the highest scorers, those types of things. And then I'm going to write out their roster and a couple times, because for me, it's the memory of like, now I have to know your name. I have to look and see that number 7 scored the goal, and I have to know number 7's name immediately without looking down and going back up, because then I've lost some time. And then I'm going to go back and watch the teams play. So I'm familiar with tendencies and familiar with the rotations and familiar with style of play and things like that. And, I may do that, a week or two before a game and spend, a few hours a day on just that one game because I want to make sure that I have it. And then I'll talk to the SID, who's the communications person for each school, and ask if I can have time with a player and a coach at some point. I try to watch the shoot around if I have time in my schedule to watch the shoot around. Also to get used to, because, their mug shots are different sometimes than what folks actually look like. They may change their hair or, whatever. Yeah. And so, I really just want to be ready from a visual standpoint and from a knowledge standpoint. So when I go in, I want to feel like, if me and you are watching the game, me and you are going to go to the game together, I can tell you immediately, hey, this girl, Tanaya Latson for Florida State, she was ACC Rookie of the Year. I'm going to tell you what she did. She was doing this, she did it, and this is what she has. And I want to be able to just do that. And so that way, when I'm broadcasting, it feels like that.
Yeah. That's one of the things that, to me, when I'm watching sports, is the names.
Yeah.
Like, how do these commentators get all these names, and I'm like, gosh, that seems like, I guess it's a skill that you develop over time, maybe that sort of thing. But I'm always impressed by that. It's like, I don't even know who these people are. And some random 8th player off the bench, and they can name their name. I always find that impressive.
It's practice. I mean, if you ever catch a broadcaster, a reporter, or somebody who's about to go live, they may look crazy because you probably see them talking to themselves. I'm sure plenty of people have seen me like what looks like me talking to myself. But really, it's practice. It's like in my head, I'm like organizing. What's the order I'm going to say this in if I'm doing a live shot for WRAL? What am I going to do in this situation? If this were to happen, how do I pivot? I'm going through all the possibilities in my head, but then, I'm also practicing the names. If I have to say a crazy hockey name because, hello, Carolina Hurricanes, all the Finnish and Russian players, then I'm going to sit there and I'm going to Antti Ranta, Andrei Svechnikov. I'm going to keep, practicing how to do that beforehand. So that way, when I'm in the moment, I'm not guessing.
Yeah. Yeah. Now you mentioned, all the different assignments, the things you have to do, Mike Tirico, Olympics, Sunday Night Football, all these things. So you're married, you've got kids. Mm-hmm. What is it like for you to try to you're still in some ways in the earlier part of your career, trying to make a name, do all these things. You've got young kids. How do you balance all that? What's that like for you in this season?
It is tough, but I just try to not waste too many moments. I don't probably have the amount of time that a lot of people have with their kids. So, when I am with my kids, like I'm trying to do something with them. It doesn't necessarily have to be out the house, but I have a 7-year-old. I may paint her nails, or I may, I tell her she's getting into reading chapter books right now. So I'm like, give me an oral book report and, act out what's happening, because I want to have that interaction with her, and create those memories. Or the same with, my 2-year-old, to different levels. And so, it's really just about being intentional with your time when you are at home. And one of my things for 2025 is to say no more, because I used to say yes to everything. Because to me, I always looked at it as, you never know what opportunity can lead you to something. It kind of goes back to your prior question. But now I have to vet things a little bit more now. So, and see if it's really, worth my time, because, I do have 2 little ones where you don't get this time back. And I don't want them to look back and say, Dad, everybody else had access to my dad and I didn't. So that's something I'm very cognizant of. So I just try to spend as much time as possible. So I'm actually, as we're recording this, it's the day before Valentine's Day. So I plan on doing some stuff with my daughters early, so they have a great Valentine's Day, and then I have a date with my wife at night. So try to keep it balanced.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm curious too. For you as a sports reporter, various things you do. We'll keep it at sports here for a second. When you're watching a game, like, do you critique? Can you enjoy it? What's it like for you when you're listening to the commentators?
I try not to critique. I'm in this spot now to where I feel like I'm still so new at play-by-play, specifically to where, I'm listening. I'm trying to pick up stuff from Kevin Harlan or, whoever is on a call for a particular game. There's a lot of guys out there that do a great job, and they have jobs that I want to have. So I'm kind of, I'm enjoying the game for sure. But then I'm also trying to pick up, nuggets and seeing how they got into this. Like, oh, that was a good way to set up the color analyst, or this was a way to get out of this, awkward situation. Or like, oh, okay, this is where the producer was talking to them and told them to do this, and he's ad-libbing something right now. Like, I can now read that a little bit better and understand what's happening. But I'm mostly just enjoying the games. I think it's easy for me to kind of let go. Sometimes, like, I fully just enjoy the games. I haven't gotten so wrapped up in what I do that I can't enjoy it anymore. Like, there's a lot of former pro wrestlers who can't watch wrestling anymore, or who can't go to live wrestling events anymore. I'm like, forget that. Wrestling comes to town. I'm trying to get as close as possible. I don't mind being a fan. I don't mind being recognized and like, oh, weren't you a former wrestler? Yeah, of course. You want to enjoy this with me? Let's watch this. So. And I'm glad I have that, because I don't want to get too cynical to where I can't enjoy the things that I enjoy. So
Now I'm curious too. Over the years, obviously you've done more things, you've got more opportunities. As you started interacting with more professional athletes, was there and is there like an intimidation factor, like a starstruckness, or you're kind of like, doesn't really bother me? What's that like for you?
I think that earlier in my career, there was a level of being starstruck. I am an introvert, believe it or not. So it's that does play a role in the way that I approach athletes, because just in general, like if I'm in person, I may not talk to you first. It's nothing that you did, but it's literally all me. I'm just an introvert. But I think that grew from being an introvert and being starstruck to being an introvert, and now I'm just used to it. So now I can just kind of sit. I've like sat in the same room with Cam Newton over here, and I'm just kind of chilling, doing my thing, but I'm just going to let him be. And then I think now I've gotten to this space of, now I'm in a spot where I'm older than all the pro athletes, which is kind of weird. Like you hear them talking about guys my age, like he's old and he's 38. It's like, God, okay. So now it's more so of and with the pressures that athletes go through, and I kind of understand it from a smaller level of being a public figure, like a very, very, very small level. They're A level, but I'm Z level, you know what I'm saying? But I do understand just a little bit. I kind of want them to have their space, because I understand that there are bad experiences in the media, right? So I'll do what I can, and I'll be, a great person and, chat and talk with, but also I'm not trying to bother you too much. I'm not trying to overstep my boundaries. I do want you to have, your level of privacy that you have, because, there's a lot of people who are every day staring at you and trying to invade your privacy. I understand that. I get that. So I think it's my relationship with athletes have kind of changed, but it's always been a decent relationship. Even now, if somebody walks past me, I'm not going to be too nervous to do my job. If I have to do my job, I'm gonna do my job. But if it's not about doing my job, I'll just walk by. I might give them a head nod and just let them walk by.
When it comes to reporting, I'm always curious about this. What it's like to report on athletes, but then also be around them and interact with and talk with them. It's sure, they might not be going and listening to everything that you have to say about it. But we talk about the Panthers, for example. You do the Panthers playbook, during the season, and it's okay. So we're talking about the games, we're talking about how they did, but also you're gonna in the locker room sometimes. And so how do you balance? I want to be objective here, but also they're human beings, and I don't want them to hate me, or you're just whatever, I'm doing my job.
I've definitely been in a situation where you could tell that this person has seen what I've said about them or the team. There's a certain look somebody has in their eye when they recognize you. It's more than just the general look. It's this little, oh, that's the guy. Okay.
Yeah.
I've always been the type of person where I'm not going to say anything publicly about somebody that I wouldn't say to them if, they approach me with it. And I'll always try to make sure that there's a fine line. If I'm talking about you, I'm talking about what you're doing on the field. I'm not going to, get into your personal life unless that becomes a story, right? If the story is, you got in the elevator and knocked out your girlfriend, then, and it's all out in the place, and I can talk about that.
Yeah.
But, if it's private information, you and your girlfriend are going through a spat, I just so happen to know because I happen to know your girlfriend's best friend for whatever reason. Nobody needs to know any of that. And that will never get brought up, right? You probably won't even know that I know this stuff.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting balance to strike, but I mean, that stuff has happened. But also, again, just going back to, I'm not going to say anything that I couldn't say to somebody, to their face. So I'm not gonna be fake around people. I'm not gonna, call them the worst person ever and then hey, so can we take a picture? I'm not gonna do all that.
Yeah. Now, do you have a favorite of all the things you're involved in, a favorite thing or a favorite sport that you get to cover currently?
So one of the reasons why I wanted to come to Raleigh specifically is because I grew up a huge fan of the ACC. I will not confirm or deny which team is my favorite in college basketball, but let's just say there might be a couple over your shoulder. So
I like that.
I want it to be closer to this area for that and to be around that. And so ACC basketball does it for me. If I did nothing else, I'd be happy with this. It's literally growing up, I remember them pulling out the televisions during the ACC tournament. Since I was in High Point, Greensboro, sometimes players would stop by my elementary school back when the tournament was in Greensboro every year and stuff like that, and talk to kids. So that's where I grew up with, and so I want to be around that. But I love football, love the NFL. So doing Panthers playbook is amazing for me. I love just getting to talk football. And I love the opportunity to cover new things and learn new things. I've learned to like NASCAR. I've learned to like other sports that I naturally wouldn't have looked at before. So, but really it's the college basketball and NFL for me.
Okay. So you don't know what the future holds, but let's just say 10 years from now, the dream plays out. You get the opportunities you want. As of right now, what would you say is if I could be doing X, Y, or Z, it would be awesome?
So I always have to do three things at one time. So the three
X,
things,
Y, and Z.
Yes.
What are the three? There we go.
So the three things in 10 years, I would love to be one of those guys I was talking about doing play-by-play. If I just had a 50 or 60 date deal with CBS Sports or ESPN or something like that to do college basketball and or college football or whatever. But it's definitely some basketball for sure. I want to make sure I'm doing some filmmaking, doing my documentaries, and I want to run my own consultancy. I want to consult and help companies and small nonprofits, get better with their PR strategies and their media training. So that is the next phase of life. I've been kind of planting some seeds with that already, but that's where I see myself doing in 10 years.
So let's talk about that second one. You know, the documentaries, that sort of thing. Like, what things have you been involved in, and why do you enjoy that so much?
Doing television and being able to tell a story long form is kind of what got me into it. There are certain stories that I told at WXI that it was very cool to me. And those stories actually got me my job at WRAL. And it was cool to take a positive, uplifting story or a sad story or just whatever and just kind of inspire people, give a good light to things that's happening in the community, stuff like that, or just inform people on things that maybe they just need to know. And I got to the point to where I'm starting to uncover things that needs more than a minute and a half, because a package on television is going to be a minute and a half, maybe 2 minutes if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And once I got to WRL and I saw that they had a documentary unit, I said to myself, within the next 4 years, because I signed a 4-year contract initially, I'm going to be a part of a documentary at WRL. And I wanted it to be pro wrestling focused and pro wrestling based. I started March 4th, 2020. And so the next week, everybody I met went home and the pandemic had happened. And so it really kind of like deferred that dream a little bit. There's a guy I worked with there at WRL who I didn't meet because of the pandemic, and he ended up leaving before I could meet him. His name was Cliff Bumgardner. He had this idea to do this pro wrestling documentary on the history of pro wrestling at Dorton Arena. The only thing is he's never been a part of the wrestling world. He's a wrestling fan. So he knew that there's this guy that he used to work with that he's never met who used to be a pro wrestler. So he reached out to me and about doing a documentary project, and I was like, this is it. I called it like, a year ago. This is God talking to me right now. And so we work on that, and it took 3 years for it to come out, but it went from this is going to be a 10-minute project on YouTube to now PBS is talking to us, and this is going to be a full-length feature, and that's out. And that was my second one that came out, but it was the first one I ever started working on. That spawned another idea. I was like, I've got to figure out something to do at WRL. And so I had this idea based off of, I love reading about history when I'm, I pulled out this one book, but I also read a lot of historical books and Black history in particular. And so I learned some things about some stadiums in this area. And so I came up with the idea of Ghosts in a Stadium. That documentary came on October of 2020. I'm sorry, October of 2023. So we are, about a year and 4 months away from that. I'm still getting speaking engagements off of it. Wow. As we're talking in 2 days, I'll find out if I won an Emmy from it. Okay. I've won 2 other awards from it already, including an Edward R. Murrow Award, which is huge for anybody in the journalism field. Because Edward R. Murrow is a legendary broadcast journalist, also happens to be from Greensboro like I am, so I love that factor too. And so that's kind of what I have going on, and right now, kind of in the early stages are in research and development of a couple other projects, so we'll see if they get off the ground. But that's what I've been involved in. I'll see later on this year when Giants Walked Here, it's the wrestling documentary, if it'll be nominated for an Emmy or not. But even if it doesn't win any awards, it was PBS North Carolina's most watched acquisition of 2024. Oh, wow. Wow. And they're still figuring out new ways to present it, because usually they put out a documentary and it kind of dies. Yeah. There's now a thirst and a hunger for more with that. And so it's been very successful for me and Cliff, and so now we're kind of looking at each other like, what's next. So we'll see what happens. So stay tuned.
That's incredible. I don't really know the question here, so I'll just say it. You can maybe talk through it. You mentioned the NABGA, if I got the acronym right. Black history. I'm just curious, like, how does ethnicity, being black, how does that impact? Like, what's that like in the broadcasting media space? How does that affect you? What's that been like? Your experience?
There's I'll say this. The Raleigh area for such a long time, as far as like who was here in sports journalism, was so much dominated by white men, right? As is a lot of things. But Raleigh in this area in particular when it comes to that. And so I'm not going to lie. When I got here, there are people who, have given me the cold shoulder. There are people who have kind of, talked behind my back. I have kind of a non-traditional way of going about things because, I told you pretty much my background. I didn't study to be on television. I'm a entertainment guy who ended up doing this, but also have a journalism background, so I know how to switch in and out of that. And so, and then also, just there's a guy by the name of Jeff Gravely who's at WRAL. Love him. But essentially, after he left WRAL, I'm the person who was, basically replacing him. And so that was hard for people inside of WRAL, outside of WRAL, in the community. I got an email from somebody who watched maybe like 8 months after I started. It was like, Chris, I honestly tried to hate you because I didn't like you, filling in for Jeff Gravely because you're so different. What is different? But okay, because you're so different. But I like what you're doing. Keep it up, right? And so sometimes it is a struggle. But one of the things that I'm glad my parents have always taught me, you never fight fire with anything, right? It only makes it worse. So there's a lot of times I'll walk into the room. There's a lot of times that, I'm new to a job or an area and doing something, and there's this way that I go about things. Like right now, I'm wearing earrings, right? I wear earrings on air. It's different, right? And in some ways, people can have comments that kind of blur the line of, is this actual criticism or is this a little on the teeter on a little racial side? But I always wear my smile. I don't mind it. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to ever see me sweat in public with it. You're not going to see me upset with it. And I'm going to keep doing my job and showing why I'm just a nice person, but a person who also cares about everybody in the community. Ghost in the Stadium, even though it has a lot of black history tied into it, black history is American history. Black history is also your history. You know what I'm saying? And so, so there's something that everybody can learn from this because we are still going through things years and years and years and years later. Things were only swept under the rug. We haven't really, come to this, time where we've really fixed things that have happened from the past and really move forward from it. So until then, I'm going to use my journalistic voice and my platform to inform people of some real history, things that have gone on, and things like that. So, so that's kind of how I deal with it. I deal with it through my work and just being better.
Yeah.
So.
Well, speaking to that, you said it was called Ghost in the Stadium.
Yeah.
I'm assuming you probably had some assumptions going in on some of the things you would learn.
Yeah.
What was one or two things that was even beyond, or like you were completely shocked by when you started doing some research?
So and it also didn't help. I wanted this to be released in November of 2023. WRL moved it up to like a few days before Halloween, so everybody thought like it was like actual ghosts. But for people who don't know, it's basically about 4 stadiums in North and South Carolina with racial histories tied to them. Keenan Stadium at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill is named after a white supremacist named William Rand Keenan Sr. It was renamed to be named after Junior, but the original name is after Senior for most of the time it's been there. He was one of the people that led the charge for the Wilmington Massacre in 1898 that murdered, which is estimated to murder over 300 black men just because they were voting and holding public office, and taking and essentially staged a coup to overtake the local government there. a lot of parallels to certain things that are going on today. And then there was Carter Finley Stadium. That land is used to be called Lincolnville. There are still graves there, formerly enslaved people. After slavery was abolished, that was a settlement of formerly enslaved people, like their own town. And the state
This is for those that don't know, this is NC State.
NC State, yeah, at NC State. And it's currently where Carter Finley Stadium and PNC or Lenovo Center is at, where NC State and Carolina Hurricanes play. That land was a for sale in 1930s. They gave them only $1 for it, and recently we've been talking about the billions of dollars of renovations and upgrades they're going to do over there. So that land is worth a lot of money, and the black people who had those lands got $1, and this is amongst many families. Yeah. They split that dollar. Then you have Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte, where the Carolina Panthers play. If you look on the 20-yard line next to where the tunnels come out, where the players come out in the tunnels, right there is where a lynching happened back in 1913. A guy who black guy got in an altercation with a police officer. He was at the hospital, which was right there on that property, which was a segregated hospital in Charlotte. Uptown Charlotte was a black town as well. Urban Renewal took that from those folks. And so the guy was in the hospital with his injuries late at night. He was pulled out on the street. That street was right there at the 20-yard line, and he was shot dead by over 30 people with guns. And then Clemson Memorial Stadium, behind the stadium near the media entrance, there's over 500 unmarked graves of formerly enslaved people, because that used to be a plantation. And it's a place where people have tailgated and thrown trash and stuff all over the place, and now Clemson is doing something to clean it up. So that's basically what that whole thing is about. And so I wanted to, first off, I thought it needed more than just a minute and a half to tell all those stories.
Right.
But then secondly, I wanted people to understand how something as small as the way something is named, or the way a company or companies are making money off of land, or whatever, is also tied to how other people have pain, whether they were killed because they're black or they had access to this land, they were building their own, and it was taken from them. Yeah. And now it's something else. And when people say you need to pull yourselves up by your bootstraps, there's a generation of people who did, and things were taken from them. Yeah. And we don't talk about this in history enough. Yeah. And these aren't the only cases. I just named stadiums. A lot of the highways and parks and stadiums and, public gathering places and lakes around the United States of America, including Lake Norman in North Carolina, have racial histories behind them. Lake Norman is not a natural lake. And so these things are out there. And so if we learn our history and learn to have compassion for each other and understand that none of us have anything to do with what happened in the past, but we all have a responsibility to change the future for our kids, then things can get better. But I think there's so many people who are disconnected from the past because they feel like it didn't happen to them. They're only looking at what people are going through now and not understanding how the past connects to now. And some people will say, hey, the past doesn't matter. But if a bunch of people in Boston didn't throw tea into the harbor and, cause a riot, we don't have this thing that's called the United States. So, yeah, the past does matter right now. Yeah. So that's always been my thing.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty heavy. I mean, you get like all spectrums, the exciting sports stuff, and then, going through the history, sharing and having to read and learn.
I'm all over the place, man. I'm all over the place.
It's hard to transition from that, but I'm going to try because that's some really great heavy stuff. And at the end too, we'll talk about it. We'll link to all these documentaries and stuff in the show notes, so people can definitely find them there.
Thank you.
I'm curious when it comes to maybe live is probably the most embarrassing thing because you can't like edit it out. What's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you so far? Maybe not live, but maybe live, just in your sports media journey.
The biggest thing in 2014, I was doing something at WXI, and long story short, it was this live shot that we had at the station with the community group. It was this community thing that we were doing, and there's a cheerleader there, or a girl who used to be a cheerleader. She just graduated high school at the time, and so I was like, hey, I can do a toe touch, and I would do a toe touch. From a leapfrog or whatever for wrestling. And so I was like, let's do a toe touch contest on air. And you can look this up. So she does her toe touch. It's all good. I come out and do mine. As soon as I get up here, I'm spread eagle. Pop, my pants ripped. And luckily I was wearing underwear that day. And I come back down and I'm like this, holding my pants. And I thought in the back of my head, I'm about to get fired, man. They are about to fire me. Instead, my boss thought it was the funniest thing ever. He puts it online immediately, and then I go viral. And so, like, Good Morning America talked to me. They interviewed me. Every news station around the United States of America and internationally picked it up. I was on Perez Hilton's blog. He was talking trash about me in 2014 because of it. This was in June of 2014. And I regularly have friends who send me like those news bloopers where people, do crazy stuff on the news. I end up on news bloopers because of it a lot. And so if you look up Reporter Splits Pants on YouTube, you'll see that. And it was a fun time because I got so much attention for it, and I still hear about it a lot today. So that's probably the biggest
funny
thing.
Now, speaking of, I don't know, going viral, but maybe not so much viral, but like, growing your career. I'm curious, you talked about, 10 years from now, some dreams, including, the 50 dates, that sort of thing. How does someone like you, I'm sure your industry is very competitive. Tons of guys, girls that are like, I want to do that. How does it happen? I know there's probably a lot of just luck, right place, right time. Mm-hmm. But how does someone go from kind of what you're doing to taking that big next step?
Who is a big part of it. Right place, right time, having good timing is a part of it. Staying sharp on your craft, constantly reinventing yourself. It all has a lot to do with it. I go to NABJ because of this, because I want to go further. So the National Association of Black Journalists exists to basically support Black people in the space of journalism, and it's essential, and I'm glad to be a part of them. But they have a convention every year, and just like the NAHJ does, and I don't remember the acronym for the Asian one, but a lot of the minority groups have their own conventions, and all the places show up there. So you have people who are hiring, the actual people who will hire people on air for CNN, Fox News, NBC News, ESPN, NBC Sports, Fox Sports, anybody you can think of, and not just television, all the publications, all the online, like Vox and, those types of places. That's how they're finding their diverse talent pool, by going to these different places. So I've been able to create some good relationships with people over the last about 9 years that I've been going. And, been able to add stuff to my repertoire because of it. It was like talking to a lady from NBC is the reason why I got into the play-by-play world. Being able to talk to somebody from CNN is how I knew to put wrestling on my resume, and it helped me get the WRAL job. So it's been something that's been invaluable for me. I look at it as an investment in myself and my future. And so for me, I think that's my path, is to continue to go to those things and network and, continue to find which door will open up. And at some point it will. I've done a few, as you mentioned before, a few games for CBS Sports. So the door is cracked open a little bit. So at some point, it's just up to me to bust it open.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now, as people are listening to this and they're hearing all the different things you're doing, maybe as you talk to people about, journalism, sports, broadcasting, that sort of thing, like what's a misconception or a couple misconceptions people have, or maybe comments they say to you that's actually not like that for what you do? We're
not fake news. We don't make up stuff. There have been people who I'll meet somebody and have a conversation with them, and they'll say, don't put this on the news, and tell me something that really doesn't matter, right? And it's like, I don't care how many Family Guy episodes you've watched, right? And it's funny to me, and I watch Family Guy, but I'm not going to listen to somebody say something and then tell their secrets on air. Nobody cares about that. Yeah. I'm talking about people who score touchdowns and three-pointers. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're just, that's what I'm talking about. And I'm probably going to forget what we talked about anyway after I get in the car and leave here. So those are some of the misconceptions that, we're just out to expose everybody, or it's fake, or that we're not real people. Everybody that you see on television, goes home and, is trying to figure out what to eat and, uses the bathroom and takes showers and all that just like you. They have their own insecurities, probably more than, what you realize. They have therapists, they cry, they, have family issues. They're going through, issues with their spouse or whoever. Everybody has real lives. And I think people kind of forget that. That we're real people too, and most of us, forget what the corporate structure is. There's a lot of criticism for the corporate structure of what journalism is, and that's a whole nother hour that we could talk about. But the people get into it to have a positive impact on other people. That's why I do everything I do, is ultimately to help people out as much as I can, and to use my influence. Like I'm on the board of a nonprofit in Durham right now. And I know that this is my opportunity to use my platform that I have in this area to also help out people who have health deficiencies and don't have the access to true health care that they deserve, right? That's important to me. And a lot of the people that you see on television have things like that. Even if they're not directly involved, they're doing stories or planting seeds in certain ways or doing free PR work for these organizations so that they can help out in any way they can. So
that's helpful. And now you've mentioned too, like when you started into this, the behind the camera and the front of the camera were two different things, and everything's so different now. Everyone's got a phone. Everyone's learning how to edit stuff.
Yep.
What do you thought? I mean, I don't know if you have any thoughts or predictions the next 5-10 years in your industry, or maybe for people who are like just trying to get into it. Like, how do you think? I don't know. AI is kind of like the thing everyone talks about now, but how does it change like what you're doing, or in the future as you think of like, people get into the industry, what to focus on? What changes do you think might come because of all the changes we're seeing?
I think AI is going to definitely have an impact, but I think ultimately, as we become smarter, smarter to what AI is, I should say, as a society, you'll be able to pick out what's AI and what's not. And so I think there's never going to be a replacement for real people, for a real report with somebody with a real soul, who is telling you what's going on. AI will have an impact. It is impacting the world right now. Technology in general is impacting us. WRAL has recently had layoffs. There's other places who've had layoffs as well. So the job pool in some ways are going to get smaller, but in other ways it's going to get bigger. And so there's going to be a shift. There are shifts right now. Like newspapers have virtually gone away for the most part, which is unfortunate. So you don't have as many local reporters giving you local news and going in depth. Television, you can only do so much in a 30-minute newscast. With the newspaper, you can print as many pages as you want to. So I think that things like folks having Substacks is going to increase more. And independent journalism, I think, is going to have a bigger rise. I think you're starting to see it now with people on YouTube through Substacks and other things, podcasts. I mean, that's we really, if you think about it, nothing has really changed. People still read things online. They still listen to podcasts and they watch YouTube videos. That's radio, television, and print. They're still doing it. It's just hitting a different form. And I think that people will still continue to follow those forms. It's just up to the journalists and it's up to the companies to adapt to that. And I think some of the companies have been slow to adapt to that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Chris, man, thanks so much for the time and sharing what you're doing. And by the time this comes out, Emmy award-winning journalist, Chris
Hopefully.
Lee, everybody. If you want to connect with you online and maybe find some of these documentaries, that sort of things, where can people go to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah, I need a website, but Chris Lee TV is how you reach out to me on Twitter or X or Instagram. So that's how you can see me there. My last name is spelled Lea. So if you get Lee, then it's probably somebody else. Ghosts in the Stadium, you can look for that. That's on YouTube. You can go to the PBS app anywhere. You don't have to just be in North Carolina. And type in When Giants Walked Here, and you can watch that documentary there. And so, yeah, I'm not shy in promoting what I have going on. So if you follow me on Instagram and Twitter, you'll know what's going on. Also, check out Ashe Wrestling on YouTube as well. And, hopefully there's some big news coming up for Ashe Wrestling soon as well. So
Awesome. Well, I'll link all that in the show notes. Chris, thanks for your time and for your insights that you shared today.
thank you. And sorry I was so long-winded. So.